Today we'll be diving into the world of bizarre and unsolved epidemics that have taken place throughout history. Get ready to learn about these epidemic events that took place and still have experts scratching their heads to this day. An epidemic is a widespread disease in a community at a particular time. From biting mania to the dancing plague, there is no shortage of strangenesses in this video. Throughout time, humans have experienced epidemics that have resulted in widespread fear and devastation. However, there are some epidemics that stand out due to their strange and unexplained nature. Let's take a look at 5 of the most bizarre epidemics that happened during medieval times. Number 1. The Dancing Plague of 1518, aka the Kolbic Dance of Sin. The Dancing Plague is a bizarre phenomenon that swept over the city of Strasbourg, France, in the summer of 1518. Hundreds of people were struck by an uncontrollable urge to dance, which resulted in mass hysteria that lasted for several months. The exact cause of the dancing plague is still a mystery. Some people believe that it was as a result of a contagious disease. Others that it was a psychological disorder. The dancing plague began in July of 1518 when a woman named Frau Troffier walked into the streets of Strasbourg and started dancing. Her movements were irregular and she was unable to stop even when her feet were bleeding and her body was tired. When she eventually collapsed from exhaustion and rested, she resumed dancing for days on end. Within days, there were dozens of people that had joined in the frantic dancing. After a week, there were over 400 people uncontrollably dancing. They danced all day and night with no signs of stopping. As the dancing plague spread to more people, it attracted the attention of the authorities and doctors. They tried many things to stop the dancing, such as prescribing rest, providing music, and organizing a mass pilgrimage to a shrine. Their efforts failed and the dancing continued to spread like wildfire. The symptoms of those who had caught the dancing plague were not just dancing either. They would suffer from hallucinations, convulsions, and some would even die from exhaustion. Only physical exhaustion caused people to stop dancing. What makes this plague so bizarre is that as abruptly as this phenomenon started, it ended in September of 1518. However, the impact of this event lingered for years, with many similar cases reported from other parts of the world. Number 2. The Sweating Sickness. During the 15th and 16th centuries in England, there were 5 epidemics known as the English sweating sickness that occurred. It was a disease of unknown causes that was severe and had a very high mortality rate. The sickness began with rigors, severe neck pain, headache, dizziness, nausea, extreme weakness, exhaustion, and hot sweats. It was an extremely fast-acting sickness and death occurred within a matter of hours. Each epidemic lasted for only a few weeks in the locations it infected. Weirdly, this illness seems to be more severe among the wealthy and royals rather than the poor. When King Henry VIII got word of the latest outbreak in the summer of 1528, he ordered that the court had broken up. They went to other parts of the country where it was safe. During this time, his mistress Anne Boleyn had contracted the sickness and went into quarantine at her family home, Hever Castle. When the king was holed up in self-isolation, he learned Anne had contracted the sickness. For his declarations of undying love, he stayed away from her and instead sent his second best doctor to her along with a love letter. Thankfully, Anne survived, despite the 50% mortality rate, only to be beheaded later by command of King Henry. The sweating sickness killed thousands of people and wreaked havoc for 2 centuries. It had completely disappeared by the late Elizabethan times. Number 3. Biting mania among nuns. In the 15th century, a mass hysteria swept over Germany, Holland, and Italy. It began with a nun who lived in a German convent compulsively biting her companions. Over the next several days, all the nuns in the convent, along with some women from nearby villages, became infected with the biting frenzy. The exact cause of this biting mania is unknown, but there are a few theories out there. Some people think it was an infection, and others thought that the devil had taken possession of them. Because of this, exorcisms were attempted on the affected nuns, but it ultimately failed. By trying to exorcise the evil spirits, they caused the contagion to spread by alarming the superstitious fears of the the sisterhood. The last resort to curing this mania was threatening the affected nuns. The doctors finally brought the biting mania to a sudden stop by threatening to whip nuns who were found biting, and by telling them that it was their mind that caused them to act. Mass hysteria may have been due to frustration and extreme sudden stress within the close-knit group. Weirdly, this can be triggered by a foul or unfamiliar odor that is perceived to be harmful. Historically, this frenzy of biting was considered a plague, but it could be perceived to be a disorder in this day and age. Number 4. Leprosy. Leprosy was a feared disease in medieval times. It was contagious and thought to be incurable. Those who were infected with it were often shunned and isolated by society. The disease was associated with sin and moral impurity, and many people believed it was a curse from God. The first recorded case dates to ancient Egypt, but the disease was also common in India, China, and the Middle East. In Europe, leprosy was first recorded in the 6th century AD. This skin-eating plague reached its peak in Europe in the 13th century, when approximately 1 million people were infected across the continent. Leprosy is an infection caused by a slow-growing bacteria called Mycobacterium leprae. The common symptoms are skin lesions, thick or stiff skin, and muscle weakness. Those who contracted leprosy would also experience painful wounds or burns on their hands and feet, numbness or tingling, loss of skin pigmentation, and loss of eyelashes and eyebrows. It gets even worse as the advanced stages include symptoms like paralysis, vision loss, disfigurement of the nose, and permanent damage to hands and feet. Some would even experience shortening of fingers and toes. The infected were sent away to nearby islands or to an isolated area. There was no cure and no treatment offered, as doctors wouldn't go near them. It was believed to be highly contagious, so the only treatment was isolation. When in public, the lepers would wear bandages to cover their sores and carried a bell to warn people they were coming. There came a point where the infection was so feared that people infected with it would be forced to live in leprosy colonies. These were segregated communities where they could care and support one another. People who lived in these colonies were often treated poorly. They were seen as being unclean and contagious. They were subject to violence, discrimination, and sometimes even death. As of 1985, leprosy was still considered a public health issue in over 120 countries. In 1991, the World Health Assembly passed a resolution to end leprosy by the year 2000. Thankfully, it's now a curable disease with multiple drug therapy, and there's very few cases of this terrible illness. Number 5. The Bubonic Plague, aka the Black Death. The Black Death was the deadliest pandemic in human history. It was caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis, which is spread through fleas that feed on infected rats. The plague arrived in October of 1347, when 12 ships from the Black Sea docked in Sicily. People who were on the docks got an awful surprise because the majority of the sailors on board were dead, and those who were still alive were very ill and covered in black boils. The fleet of ships were ordered to leave the harbour, but it was already too late. Over the next few years, the Black Plague killed over 25 million people in Europe. The symptoms of this devastating illness included sudden high fever and chills, pain in the abdomen, arm and leg pain, headaches, and swollen lumps in the lymph nodes that leaked pus. The bubonic plague was treated in many interesting ways, but these two stand out. The Vickery method involved plucking feathers from a live chicken's rump and then tying the chicken to the person with the chicken's rump on the lymph node. It was believed that chickens would draw the infection out of the person. If the patient died, then so be it. If the chicken died, they would simply just use another one. The second treatment was even more bizarre, and also quite gross. As if having the Black Plague wasn't enough, the infected were subjected to having human feces administered onto their bodies. Human feces would be mixed with other substances into a paste. The boils on the person would be opened, and the paste would be applied. The consequences of the Black Plague was devastating. There was an end to wars and a sudden decline in trade following a short amount of time. A more serious consequence was the large reduction of the amount of land under cultivation due to the death of so many laborers. Thanks for watching another show of History's Weirdest. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Cheers!